How was Helen Keller able to do anything if she was blind and deaf? Through touch, doing hand signals, and interpreting hand signals pressed against her palms. It still boggles the mind what she was able to accomplish. Accomplishments of Helen Keller. First deafblind person to earn a bachelor's degree. Authored the famous autobiography, The Story of My Life. Traveled as a lecturer. Advocating for people with disabilities. Supported women's rights, pacifism, and civil rights. Co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Because people cared for her. Because the people who cared for her made sure she would have an existence beyond being a lukewarm meatbag. My 13-year-old niece made this huge thing at Thanksgiving about how Helen Keller wasn't real, and I think that's like a conspiracy theory amongst the kids today. IDKLOL. Seriously, read her autobiography. Babies and children are pretty amazing at learning, taking things in from their surroundings and making sense of it any way they can. The only sense she had access to for communication was her sense of touch. If that's the only input she receives, then she'll naturally become very adept at using it in a way that we would never comprehend. Her teacher would draw signs on her hands in response to certain stimuli. After a repeated number of times, Helen would eventually form associations between the sign and the stimulus. For example, the feel of water on her hand followed by the sign for water traced on her hand by her teacher. Eventually, she learned to ask for water by tracing the sign on her teacher's hand. She flew a plane. She didn't fly the plane, they probably put her in the cockpit and put her hands on the controls for a minute. Same way current deafblind people do. Through tactile education and communication. Humans are extremely adaptable beings. How did you learn of Helen Keller and not learn about how she was able to learn to communicate? Is Op also blind and deaf? So many great explanations, yet Op keeps asking the same question. People keep talking about how she learned how to sign water, but I'm still confused how she learned more complex ideas and things that are not just solid objects she can touch. I can sort of guess, but still very crazy. The question has been answered. So this is an interesting addendum. She was a goodwill ambassador to Hiroshima and met survivors. She told one of them that although she couldn't see what the bomb had done, she could smell it a year later. It's just a part of history I didn't know about and surprised me to learn of. Strong sense of smell. Important to remember that Helen wasn't born deaf and blind. That was a huge advantage for her. There's literally footage of her somewhere on YouTube from the 60s, 70s communicating with her carer in tactical sign language and speaking out loud. She wasn't a mythical figure LMAO, she was a real deaf-blind person who learned how to communicate. There's a whole book about explaining exactly that. Multiple, in fact. Watch the movie. She had a brain that was worth something. Meanwhile, some people who aren't blind or deaf still can't look up how she was able to learn to communicate, and instead ask questions of disbelief on Reddit. Those brains aren't worth anything. I mean, anything is possible. After all, the deaf, dumb, and blind kid played a mean pinball.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. TooAfraidToAsk is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.